When you were talking about Grace Papaya, I was thinking about another bundle that they have, which is the hot dog with the papaya juice. Now, this is a completely artificial bundle, but it is the one that they religiously try to defend.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so,
German spice sausage goes good with tropical fruit.
Yeah, but I mean, let's start with you and with Michael, because in some sense you're talking about, like, where in the value chain do the incumbent and entrant advantages lie? And Clay, you're actually echoing something that Clay Christensen said this morning, which is that it's not as if the new technologies are going to go to the core. It is that the customers from the core
Right.
are going to be sucked out and are going to be sitting where the new technologies are. And Michael, where do you think incumbent and entrant advantage lie? And
A kind of unspoken theme today is how the innovation economy is creating a reality that all of these new market entrants can really take advantage of. And that's because that's where the jobs of the future are, that's where the job growth is, and it's a new core, right? It's a new core. And so if you look at General Assembly or at Dev Bootcamp, they're emerging in this new core where you can create a business and charge real money for people to learn the skills of the future, right? In terms of incumbent institutions, first of all, I would be interested in that new core, first of all. And then secondly, in my kind of bundling taxonomy, what a university does really, really well is facilitate this culture of personal exploration, right? And a lot of the other stuff they do is just the way that they do things. And I was really excited to hear Clay go through a course, a department, a major. This is all fictitious stuff. We made it up. We don't have to do it that way. Because frankly, that creates an institutional structure that distracts itself from its primary value proposition, right? Which is that we facilitate a personal transformation. And I would say that universities have a lot to learn from places like Dev Bootcamp that focus on personal transformation at a level that would just blow like the collective university's mind.
okay,
right?
but over a shorter period of time.
But in a 9-week program, they're able to kind of create this religious personal transformation.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that, and I'm just add that the classic mistake when people face the internet, face new competition from the internet, is to try to do what the internet does rather than going the other direction. So you see this with, say, the Associated Press, which for a while said, we have to beat Twitter at breaking news, to which the answer is, forget it. You can't. Twitter will consume everything you produce and still add more value on top of it. So the AP strategy is now moving in the other direction of how do we actually create cumulative value. So for centuries now, the founding moment of an American college or university has been the donation of a library, because for God's sake it was hard to get to information. And if you had some information, you had something of real and lasting value that was difficult to copy. And that started being a wasting asset circa about 1995. So the founding gesture that we're used to is now the thing being commodified, whereas the stuff that we've regarded as kind of essentially the meta stuff, the things you were referring about of going to games and parties, interacting with one another. What we offer that none of the low-cost competitors can offer is face-to-face interaction with the faculty and among the students. And there are low-grade substitutes for that kind of interaction online, but the important thing about social media is social media is not better than face-to-face, it's just better than nothing. So there's an interesting thing up on the wall about the sort of U-curve. There's a shear line someplace between Penn and Penn State where institutions get into difficulties with just content delivery, just education and certification. If you want to be on the rising side of that, the thing we need to concentrate on is peer learning, peer socialization, personal transformation. It's the worst thing in a way to do if you're in competition with the internet is try to beat the internet as the stuff the infrastructure does natively well.
Okay.
I hope this question is not too early, considering that it's almost the end of the day. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I don't know about you, but my head's spinning. There's been so much valuable information here. And I'm over at the School of Social Work, and we're sort of in the beginning phases of going into the online space with some of our core curriculum. And I'm a practical guy, and I can't help but to wonder throughout this conversation, knowing what we know now from being here, what do we do with that information when we get back to the real world tomorrow? This feels like a dream state. And so I'm wondering, where do we begin? How do we get started? And maybe that's not the right question for right now, but I'd like to put it on the table because I think it's something we need to think about.
I've spent my whole life in academia and not as an entrepreneur or startup company. I'll respond to that. And it relates to what Clay just said. My biggest wish is that the faculty would spend their energy and time on those really high value things that they absolutely do help facilitate at universities. Certainly at our university, faculty are deeply involved in the life of students and facilitating incredible life-changing events. But I think sometimes we get stuck in a pattern where we spend a lot of time talking about, should this count for credit or should that count for credit? Can we take this course and substitute that course? So it's kind of that classic thing of spending the most time on the things that are probably least critical to our mission and least valuable. And I think at some level we know that, but we get set in patterns that make it really hard. So I would start with that. What is it that you do that is transformational and not easily replicated and not get sidetracked into, could this course be an online course or not? Could we accept an online course for credit instead? I think there's way too much energy going into those sorts of things right now.
So sort of focus on what we do
Focus
best
on the
and-
things that we do best and that are not easily replicated. Exactly.
Yeah. And it seems like there's sort of there's a non-trivial overlap between those two things. Right?
And I'll add one thing from the sort of entrepreneurial culture. Something that no startup ever asks in any meeting ever is, do we have permission to do this? Every time in the academy we get involved in that conversation, we're essentially saying, let's just put on the brakes just because. And you can't simultaneously deal with that logic and commit the department as a whole to anything. Because when you commit the department as a whole to something, you have to ask the permission questions. So to the degree that you can create an environment where, we flipped 2 classes over to ITP, and we've done it in 2 completely different ways, right? Each faculty member had a way that they wanted to try it. And so one guy just painted the walls of his office green and brought a camera in. And in a way, to the degree that you cannot have to ask that a question, it's like subsidiarity in the United States government. If you don't have to ask the question in Sexton's office or David's office, don't do that. If you don't have to ask the question in the school office, don't do that. If you don't have to ask the question in the department office, if you can push it down to a class or a faculty member and see what happens first, you will learn so much more with so much less bureaucratic overhead.
And one thing to add to that is, I would definitely say the best education I ever received was in a traditional academia setting. And I went to a grad school called the VCU Brand Center in Virginia, and it's a very well-known advertising school. And those 7 atomic units that you discussed, we didn't really have those in my school, and I don't think they really asked permission. So I never had to buy a book. We never had tests. We never had quizzes. It was everything was very extremely project-based. And I look at that experience, and it was the best education I ever received. Granted, it was in grad school, and they could bend the rules a little bit, but I don't really think they asked for permission. And the school became so widely popular because the alumni base became so successful that the school just allowed them to, the traditional school adopted to that learning format, and now it's just widely and open and accessible, and it's it's allowed. So.
And where do you where do you see, like if you look forward a few years, what do you see the universities not doing that you think Skillshare is going to do? Like, what are they going to, what are we not going to be doing that you're going to sort of that's going to build your company?
Yeah, I would say I definitely look at it less about Skillshare and more of like what will happen in the industry. And I definitely look at what would be the best outcome for anyone that's interested in learning that's a student. And I think, the beauty behind healthy competition is that there will always be disruption, there will always be innovation. So when I went to VCU, one of the things I thought of is, why did I have to go to this school second? Why did I have to go to UVA first? And then why did I have to pay so much money for this school? And why couldn't this just exist when I was 16, 17, 26? And why couldn't I just go straight to the school? And I think there are a lot of things popping up that break those rules around those atomic units, and we'll just define a different way. It'll be affordable. It'll be different. And I think as long as those options keep popping up, I won't have to send my kids. I won't have to homeschool them. I'll have a lot of options. I'll send them to traditional academia. I'll be able to send them to this cool DIY school where they could build things and build robots and allow them to just be really curious and creative and just learn and become passionate. And I think something that would be supplementary to traditional academia is probably the best thing that could happen for students.
I think you should actually inverse the question and say, what is Skillshare able to do with a different cost structure, and what costs do universities have that he won't have? Because I've taken courses on Skillshare, and to be honest, if you assume the course format, the courses on Skillshare are often far better at teaching me stuff than the course format that I had in university. So, and he's able to secure some of the best faculty to teach the best courses with having no overhead. How many employees do you have right now?
20.
So 20 employees, and they sit in an office in Brooklyn, right? Something like that? Yeah. And that's the whole thing.
If we're really thinking about change, if we're thinking about the future of higher education, it can't be an education that is conceived of and presented as so much male-dominated as today's symposium has been. Adam, Basant, Arun, I like you guys and I think the world of you, but there are an awful lot of women across the university who need to be represented much more strongly in forums like this, because we are doing things that also need to be counted and acknowledged, and we have a lot to add to the conversation. So it's really a provocation rather than a question, but now I'm done.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Donna Highland. I'm at Emerson College in Boston. And it's a question and I guess just an observation. This has been a great series of presentations, really stimulating. And the one piece I keep looking for is, this is very big really, sort of what we think higher education is for. The conversation has really been about higher education as job preparation. I think that is an important part of what we do. I think we have to do it and do it well. I was delighted to hear some conversation about liberal education emerge in the liberal arts. I'm aware of higher ed in the US, and I didn't grow up in the US, having a strong civic dimension. We think of higher education as a public good. I think that's a really valuable thing. And as we move forward and think about what we keep, what we hold on to, what we change, I think we want to actually take up Clay Shirky's challenge and say, well, what's a university for? How do we backwards design for that? If we value the civic mission, if we value the public good, how do we make that happen? It doesn't have to be in a civics class. It can be anywhere. It can be online. It might be more effectively online. I also think about Albert's comment about K through 12. It might be that we think about the K-16 ecology and sort of think about where we locate some of the purposes, where are the outcomes that we're moving towards, and how do we get there? I think a lot of this probably could be done online, but I'd love to see the conversation open out to remember the sort of full richness of what we've thought higher education to be. We may not want to hold on to that, we may, but it seems worth having on the table. So.
I mean, there's sort of a market failure aspect to that again, which is that, well, go ahead.
So there is absolutely a market failure to that aspect, but the year that market failure began was 1975, which is the year that the states began defunding. There was a 15-year run-up, and then when it tipped, it has stayed tipped. There have only been two kinds of years since 75, years in which the money went down and years in which it didn't. But it has not gone back up. So in a way, what you've said, which sounds at first listening like a conservative impulse, is actually a radical one, because higher education is much less of a public good in this country than it was 40 years ago. It is less of a public good in the pure economic sense of non-rival and non-excludable. It is also less of a public good in the sense of right now we have the wrong kind of governmental units to treat it as a public good, because if Arkansas invests heavily and the students leave, Arkansas can't capture that value. Only the federal government is in the position to capture the value of subsidy, and they are not going to get into the business that the states are getting out of. So in a way, the curious thing about the MOOCs, limited as they are around a certain set of subjects, is those behave much more like public goods. They are non-rival and non-excludable. They are easy to provision. They can be relatively open. And so, although many of the, there's a very curious habit among people defending their institutions against MOOCs. Deneen of Pepperdine and Mark Edmonds down in UVA and so forth make a kind of bucolic argument even as they sit in institutions that offer online degrees, and they never mention that part. That's the Arcadian vision. Let's go back to the past. It's not, we cannot, especially here at NYU, we cannot become Reed, we cannot become Deep Springs, we cannot become St. John's College. Which means that your provocation says if we want civic education and public good, we have to use the new affordances to go forward. And that's going to be a really hard conversation, but I think we have to frame it as a future desire and not a present act of conservation.
There's a parallel with journalism, right, where the business models now of newspapers and magazines will underprovide investigative journalism. Because their business models cannot sustain it. And this is not good for society. And in the same way, there are particular kinds of education and particular kinds of research that may potentially be underprovided by universities in the future, because people choosing things may choose skills rather than, as Foster pointed out earlier, ethics.
There's good faith and bad faith arguments on both sides, right? So the bad faith argument I think I'm on the record as thinking Udacity and Coursera are going to be catastrophic if they succeed. I think that they will be as bad for higher education as the University of Phoenix and Capella have been, because there is no business model in education where the profit margin is higher than asset stripping student loans. So even though those institutions now seem to be headed by true believers, they are one management change away from the same scummy business practices as Kaplan's and Capella and so forth have adopted, as we know from the GAO investigation. So the bad faith arguments on the startup side is essentially universities are old and tired and need to be shed like a shell. There's a profit-seeking motive there. The bad faith argument on our side is nothing must be allowed to change because any change is a threat. I think we have to recognize that when there's a change in the environment this big, it's not our choice about what we preserve and what we don't. It's only our choice about how we adapt and how we don't. And that's the conversation I'd like to see going on inside our institutions.
So there's a hand there.
Okay, well, thanks. So I'm Sharon O'Halloran. I'm a professor at Columbia. I actually teach political science and do big data. I do game theory. So those are types of courses that I think Coursera's and so forth have really a comparative advantage, and ones that we can utilize within our own classroom with our own pedagogy very effectively. We can now assume that they can get this knowledge, and they can get this knowledge free, and I don't have to provide it. So for me, that's who does these big data stuff. That's fabulous. I can now move up a value chain and use my time and expertise really in the high value way that I was trained to do, which is in training students to do this high-end research and aggregation of information using the skill set that they have gained, and I don't have to be the provider of that skill set. So I get to rebundle, if you will, on the fly what I'm offering. And so the question then becomes, instead of, it's disruptive, but it could be disruptive in a good way, how do we facilitate that within higher education, which I think of my own institution, how do we facilitate that, and how do we enable, and I'm perfectly fine to source out some of those, but how do we provide an infrastructure, a funding model that enables? So I would love to see ways in which public-private could sort of work together to beneficial, and I see these both as very complementary as a substitutional, and I think because of the demand is not the increasing demand, lower price increases, is actually very lexicographic preferences, and that actually proposes a different types of opportunities where value added actually means a lot, and you even becomes more valuable the harder it gets to have. So I actually throw out a different model and a different way to envision some of the transformations, and I go back to what education was really about. It was really educating citizens for governance. And it's not clear to me, and with all due respect, Code Academy, General Assembly will provide the governance, and this is just going back to Socratic, why we had an educated society was to provide that type of leadership and governance, and that and citizenship. And again,
I mean, that was actually the objective of the liberal arts education.
well, it was actually the objective of why you had any education as opposed to just training and moving from the apprenticeship, which was the original, if you will, original way in which education or knowledge was transmitted through apprenticeship to an institution such that imparted citizenship and governance, and then allowed for things such as democracy, and which is extraordinarily transformative. So I'm going to put that out there and suggest that both can go hand in hand, I believe. It's really how do you provide a model, which is really what I wanted to hear today. I wanted to know about the funding model, because right now there is no model that's working, business model that's working.
We are going to be savaged. We are going to be savaged.
Who is going to be savaged?
Everyone who teaches at a traditional college and university is going to be savaged because our cost structure does not meet the contemporary realities. There are only three ways. There are only three ways to keep expenses below revenues: direct fees, subsidies, and cost cutting. We're running out of steam on the first two. We've done just about everything we can.
Well,
on
our
the first
students
two.
cost us money.
Right,
They
right,
cost us money.
right.
So we don't. That's not our value-added proposition. We would do better without students. So,
You can make-
so we subsidize our students so heavily. So you need to give me another.
So part of this answer, and this may be some of the answer to the research question earlier, there may just be more Rockefeller universities where jettisoning the students becomes the way to maximize the value of the NSF grants. But for those of us, no, seriously. I've lived through so much happy talk about these things are complementary with the music industry, with the journalism industry. We're shooting ourselves in the foot if we allow ourselves to believe that. We're going to be savaged by this because our cost structure can't meet the contemporary realities of what's possible with subsidy, direct fees, and cost cutting. And we deal really, really badly with cost cutting. Cost cutting freaks faculty out so much that even though it is the one recourse left to us, it's almost impossible to push through. So I think culturally, we're simply not going to be able to digest what's coming in any ordinary way.
So can I
Go
abuse
ahead,
my
yeah.
privilege as one of the moderators? So Clay, earlier on you sounded a little more upbeat than you just did.
That was a mistake, and I'm sorry I did that.
But I want to ask a real question.
Yeah.
You're sinking lower and lower in your chair.
So someone drew an analogy that universities these days feel like sort of IBM in the 90s. And I think it's a great analogy because Lou Gerstner was brought in to break up the company so that the various divisions could compete with these competitors, Oracle and so on and so forth. Now, I guess my question to you is there a chance that universities could do that? Should they do that? What should universities do, or is it just bad news?
I don't think there's any university in this country that could conceivably tell itself it's going to be smooth sailing. Even Harvard, when the 2008 crash came, it turned out they were funding Faculty of Arts and Sciences off the permanently rising stock market. They had a hiring freeze for 2 years. I think we poached some people because they couldn't hire. So to say everybody's going to get in trouble is not to say that everybody's going to go away. What the internet does to any industry where information is moved around, including ours, is it cuts costs out of at least part of the equation. The Gerstner-like adaptation would be to say, what's the cheapest way we can deliver the stuff that's the hardest to get to produce. So
Yeah.
IBM, I think we're more like IBM in the 80s, alas, which is to say the era that ushered in the need for Gerstner. And what IBM did is it said, we're getting out of the business of selling software. And so for us, if we get out of the business of selling access to content, that would be an IBM-like transformation for us. And then I want that chart. That is the best breakout of that value chain I've ever seen. But that, it basically, if you go on that chart and you say anything that's dark blue, imagine that the value of that goes to 0. What does your institution look like after that?
That was the point of the chart. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we call on Sharif?
I want to say a couple of things. First, if you're in this room and you're in education, thank you. By the way, even though you're going to be savaged. No, that's thank you. And so I have a quick question and a suggestion for how to fix everything. I think will actually work.
Okay.
The quick question is, what percentage of NYU grads get jobs within 3 months of graduation, and what's the average salary?
I'd guess over 90%. For Stern, I think it's over 90% of our undergraduates, 95% of our undergraduates have a job within 3 months, and I'm going to pull a number out of my.
Yeah, Tisch is different.
Yeah, I don't have any direct information on the other.
What's the
schools.
intent of that
The
question?
intent is because it seems fashionable to provoke. It's a provocation. And Michael showed a chart that 50% of the reason why students and parents send their students here is to get a job. And that number should be up front and center for every one of the 12 schools. In bold, first internally, everyone should know that number. And then maybe a challenge to, in a year, make that public and see what happens there. And that alone, I think, you decide to do that. First, to look in the mirror and say, like, wow, what percentage do get jobs? We don't know. What's the average salary? We don't know. Even though that's really what they care about, what the students care about. You should know that number.
That was a setup there for me. I'm guessing that there are certainly sort of a lot of people at each of these schools who spend all of their time thinking about this and who are extremely focused on both those metrics and on those objectives of the students.
And none of them are in this room?
Not all of them, not every one of us at a university is focused on those two metrics. I mean, to me, that would be, that might solve a problem, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but perhaps it's not the only metric that we should be focusing on.
But he's not saying it's the only metric. He's just pointing out that it hurts our feelings to even talk about it.
Yeah.
And we should get over that.
I think the fact that we couldn't
Probably
come up
don't hurt
with
your
the
feelings. You're at Stern. I'm
Yeah.
at Tisch. So.
Traditional institutions have a monopoly on credentialing so far, and I'm wondering just how you all are thinking about alternative credentialing and the effect that alternative credentialing is going to have on higher education.
But I can take that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is an example where the innovation economy it has clear examples, and then that will kind of bleed out to the rest, right? And within the innovation economy, particularly around internet businesses, like designing and coding lend itself to show me your portfolio, show me your actual work. And so you don't need a credential. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to a VP of engineering over the weekend who said, I actually discount computer science degrees because it means they've over-invested in irrelevant information that makes them think that they're too expensive for me, basically. So anyway, where I'm going is a group of common minds got together that are all unaccredited immersive programs, these career accelerators, learning accelerators, boot camps. And we got together and we said, do we want to create an alternative form of accreditation or not? And we said, no, we want to be proudly unaccredited. And in this new world where information travels around the world in an instant, you can create a global brand, a globally recognized brand, without being certified by any external body. And your brand itself creates the credential.
I just want to show Edna Pirana's GitHub. She's really Jen Fong Edwin, but she goes by Edna Pirana. So this is her page on GitHub, which is the social coding platform. And one of the metrics that is developed just as a side effect of her doing her work here is, and the public contributions isn't loading, but it says, there's usually a graphic here, but it will list her total activity, almost 3,000 commits, 184 days of a commit a day, 35 days in the current streak. that GitHub, by producing metrics that other coders recognize as being relevant to one another, produces as a side effect a credential which is more granular and more directed at the kinds of things employers care about than a CS degree.
Yeah, and to give another example on Skillshare too, much like design or coding or writing, a lot of the students, what they're doing is they're actually creating projects with the actual work of everything that they're doing. So students will create a profile, have the rock poster design that they made, the Photoshop class that they took, and the project that evolved out of it. They'll have what students are saying about that student. Teachers will leave endorsements for them. So they're building this reputation that when they apply for a job, much like a GitHub profile, it says so much about their knowledge and their skills that, you know, a certificate could or could not miss. And there's huge proof that they know the skill that they're demonstrating.
How are we doing on time?
I think it's time for a drink.
Oh wow, okay, it's 5:22. Do you want to sort of do the thing, or?
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on the wall. I think we've made a commitment to capture all of this and mail it out. But one of the things that happens when you do an exercise like this is the list of everything that everybody can think of turns out to be less interesting than the subset of the list that gets the most focus. So a bunch of stuff up here are things people can imagine happening, but turns out don't exercise anybody in the room. That's the stuff you can ignore. There's a bunch of stuff that is likely to happen, but unlikely to have any significant effect. That's the stuff you don't lose sleep over. The rise of certificates over here, open enrollment, executive and certificate programs that are shorter and more specialized, already happening. We factored that into the environment. We can certainly predict more of it. Don't worry too much about it. Similar to the discount observation there, I think. Numerous brand name universities offer deeply discounted Masters of Science degrees. Happening with Georgia Tech. More will happen. Not many orange stars there. There was the stuff that was unlikely but high impact. Whether or not degrees get completely replaced, whether or not pure peer-to-peer teaching comes in, all of these things do seem unlikely, but if any of them would happen, that would be a meteor strike. That would be an educational environment that was really dramatic. But the most interesting list to me looking around at this is the stuff that was both high likelihood and high importance. Online reputation systems start to replace degrees. We're already seeing that with General Assembly and things like GitHub. The production of synthetic degrees. Google Richard Linder, the guy who put together an associate's degree 60 credits at a time out of bits and pieces he found lying around. He put together essentially the first half of a 10K BA using existing systems. He went to either was Excelsior or Empire State, one of the certification for prior learnings places. That is already happening, the synthetic degree. A rise of highly specialized colleges. You look at Olin, the engineering school that was founded in Massachusetts. That is already happening. The rise of customer-focused education. It's certainly the Obama administration's goal. When you look at the GAO investigation, the for-profit sector and so forth, the pressures that are pushing towards that are already happening. And this U-curve, this well curve of the Ivies and near Ivies do well, and the low-cost community colleges do well, and the mid-tier, we're just here because why not suck up the money for a 4-year degree? Those places suffer. Again, already happening. You can look at what's going on with law schools as an exemplar. So the most significant thing to me about this list is the stuff that is high likelihood and high impact, details things that are already happening in the present. This isn't even a future scanning exercise. So while in many places, in many universities, the conversation around this stuff is might this happen and might it be a big deal? I think we can see from what's been surfaced here that the environment is already changing out from under us. We'll capture this and send it out in email, but I think it's just an interesting exercise to see that the stuff that we think is going to be the biggest deal and has the highest likelihood is all already happening. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for coming. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I'm sure we'll continue to be in touch.